So I'm going to keep this hand. Double Serum Visions is pretty good at helping us set up. We'll see. We are on the draw. And Scalding Tarn could mean a number of different decks. I think we still want to Serum Visions here. We're not looking for land particularly. Now we have 4 lands. Snapcaster and Cryptic are both redundant in our hand, so it's a matter of we don't know what we're playing against. Do we want these cards? I think we probably do. It's kind of a little bit of a guessing game because we don't know what we're up against, but I am going to put them on top. And hopefully that is going to be the correct decision. So we could be up against like a blue-red, blue moon type of deck with like blood moons and that type of thing. That would not be good if that is the case. Just because we don't have any basic planes in this hand, so we could get pretty color screwed. But we'll see. Hard to know. Some sort of blue-red deck for sure. That's all we know. So I am going to Serum Visions here. So this time it's a little bit different. Spreading Seas and Spell Snare. I'm going to put this Spell Snare on top. And I think we have to hope that our opponent doesn't have a Blood Moon here. And looks like here's a Lightning Bolt. Okay, so that's not really bad news per se. Our opponent bolts us for 3. Okay, not too sure what to make of that play actually, because normally you don't want to just bolt the opponent's face in the middle of what looks to be a control mirror. So nothing we can do about this Electrolyze. We're going to take it. And now we have Cryptic Command Mana, so hopefully that's we can rely on that to stop these burn spells from hitting us. And our opponent is fetching basic islands, which could mean that they have Blood Moon in their deck. I'm going to counter this Glimmer of Genius. Glimmer of Genius, that's a peculiar card to have. Haven't seen that one be played too much in Modern. Whether it means that our opponent has energy sinks or just wants the draw 2 and scry is unclear. But here's the Blood Moon, which is pretty devastating. We thought it was in our opponent's deck. Now it's come down. And there's not too much we can actually do about this. So we have Detention Sphere, but no white mana, so we do have a couple of basic planes to potentially draw into. I'm going to run out a Snapcaster Mage. If our opponent decides to counter it, then okay. I think we had to counter the Glimmer of Genius. If our opponent had the Blood Moon, they could have cast it earlier in the game. So we can Spell Snare this Snapcaster Mage. Still a frustrating spot, though. Our opponent's got 2 cards in hand. If we draw the plains, that would be great. We would be able to potentially get this Blood Moon off the table, unlock the rest of our lands, and have more gas than our opponent. And it looks like Grixis is what we're up against. Unclear what the black is for so far, because it looked initially like a straight blue-red deck. I'm going to flash in the Snapcaster Mage, see what happens. So it could be that our opponent has a counterspell, but wants to think about if they want to use it, just because they would be vulnerable to some of our other cards in hand if we do draw a plains. And unfortunately, this hand didn't have a flooded strand in it, which would have been great. So here's a Torrential Gearhulk. This isn't one you typically see, but Torrential Gearhulk for Glimmer of Genius is actually quite good here. So even though unless we draw the plains, we're gonna lose this game, almost certainly. I'm gonna still play towards our outs and then think about game 2 and what we would want to sideboard in. So the Spreading Seas locks down the swamp, so that means our opponent really only has access to blue and red mana. So mana leak, okay, sure, we'll take it, but still not what we're looking for. And that's just going to be the game. Pretty unfortunate. Blood Moon is that type of card that can just really take over the game even if you were otherwise winning, and that's essentially what happened there. So after sideboard, we want to board in some of these counter spells, these Vendilion Clicks, these negates, these dispels, and we know exactly what our opponent's playing. We can also potentially go towards Celestial Purge, although that's just for Blood Moon. So it's exile a black or red permanent. We only really know about the Blood Moon in terms of black or red permanents in our opponent's deck. So we want to take out some of our removal for sure. So both Path to Exile and Condemn don't seem great. I'm going to go ahead and take out the Condemns and also some Supreme Verdicts. So just kind of shaving on that spot removal for this matchup. The core Firewalkers seem like they could be alright, just because our opponent is playing with burn spells rather than... We didn't see that much spot removal, so I'm actually going to try boarding in these core Firewalkers as a way to potentially get aggressive in the matchup. And shave some more of the spot removal, keeping in the Spreading Seas. They're not great in this matchup because our opponent has a lot of basics and the mana base is pretty good, but if we're able to, say, land a Firewalker and then back it up with counter magic, that could even go the distance. Like, we want to be able to have the luxury to hold up mana for the Blood Moon, or to get basics out. So like this hand, we have a Flooded Strand. So we can just fetch a basic island with the Flooded Strand, suspend Ancestral, and be in a much better spot already than we were in the previous game. So yeah, Ancestral into Spreading Seas, that's not bad, although it depends what land our opponent plays, whether we're going to end up playing the Spreading Seas or not. But we happen to have the basics. Now, that being said, our opponent may also have Spreading Seas of their own to play. So Island into Serum Vision's okay. So if we play the Spreading Seas, which may still be the correct play, it doesn't do anything besides be a cantrip, but like I said, the Spreading Seas aren't that great in the matchup anyways. We're just kind of looking to dig through our deck. So I'm actually fine with playing the Spreading Seas on our opponent's island and just kind of digging for lands. We found one already. So in a control mirror, you really want to be hitting your early land drops to not fall too far behind. And I think we can actually play another Spreading Seas here, holding up Spell Snare. So if our opponent goes untapped Blood Moon, the reason why I'm okay tapping out here is because we have the Detention Sphere this time, and we also have the basic land, so it wouldn't be quite as big of an issue. So once again, our opponent's playing a Lightning Bolt at a time that doesn't really make that much sense to do so. So just because you can play this Lightning Bolt whenever you want to in this type of matchup. So it could be that our opponent was planning on going Snapcaster Bolt, but it's a little bit early for playing straight up burn spells, I think. So now we're in a spot where we can just play land go and sit back. We've got that Ancestral Vision that's going to be coming off Suspend. I think we can afford to get a Hallowed Fountain here. Now we have an island and a plains out. So this could cause a little bit of a counter war. We'll see what our opponent has. So it's going to be Negate. And I like using the Spell Snare now on this Negate, because we really want this Ancestral Vision to resolve. We'll see if our opponent then responds with their own counterspell or not, but it looks like not. So we drew plenty of gas here. And this Suspend Ancestral. We still have both Snapcaster and Mana Leak at the ready. So it's just a matter of being patient now. We have the advantage, so we just have to capitalize on it, essentially. And plenty of basics means that Blood Moon is not going to be quite as good. So it's a matter of if we want to counter this or not. We probably still do. It's not a huge issue, but we have this Mana Leak sitting in our hand that we can use. Because Blood Moon is still a scary card. We saw how good it was in the previous game. This game, it wouldn't be nearly as impactful, and it looks like it's going to resolve. So I'm going to sacrifice this Flooded Strand before this Blood Moon comes down to get a basic island. And so even though this Blood Moon is coming down, we both have the Detention Sphere to deal with it this time. And we don't even need to necessarily deal with it. We can just play an Elspeth and try to win with that, which has a very good shot of working. So I'm just going to play Elspeth here. And you can see just how very different the situation is than last time the Blood Moon hit the table. So now our opponent's probably wishing they had that Lightning Bolt back to try to bolt away our Elspeth. I doubt that they have enough burn to burn us out completely. So I'm going to start with an attack. We can Detention Sphere this Blood Moon, since our opponent doesn't really have anything else that's scary on the board. I'm going to go for the Detention Sphere, see if our opponent lets that happen or not. So that is going to resolve. Okay, good. That's step one. And now I'm going to leave up Snapcaster plus Mana Leak or Spell Snare. So if our opponent makes a play, we can Snapcaster it here. Could be a Glimmer of Genius or a Cryptic command. Okay. Think we want to counter that. Just to keep our Elspeth in play, we wouldn't want for the Elspeth to get bounced. Then, I mean, it's so unlikely that we're going to lose this game based on what we know about our opponent's deck. But if the Elspeth got bounced and maybe our opponent had a way to deal with these tokens, that would be one scenario we could lose. So we actually have our opponent on a 2-turn clock here. So maybe our opponent's going for a Cryptic command, but at this point it's a little bit late for trying to bounce Elspeth. So expecting this to just go to a game 3, but you never know. Okay, so we were able to set ourselves up much better that game, knowing what's in our opponent's deck, navigating through that. Pretty happy with this configuration. Celestial Purge is an option because we're on the draw, just as a way to get rid of Blood Moon. Kind of like that, actually. It's only an answer to Blood Moon, but Blood Moon is the card that we're the most worried about, for sure. And in terms of what to take out, I'm okay with shaving a couple of Spreading Seas. They're just 2 mana, draw a card. A little bit of a liability in the matchup, I would say, because we have to give our opponent credit that their mana seems quite good. So this is a hand where I think it's a good hand in this type of matchup. We want to be, we have the time to start drawing cards. We just have to be worried about, like I was saying, the Blood Moon for sure. And the fact that we don't have a basic plains means that we're a little bit vulnerable to our opponent just having the turn 3 Blood Moon. And so I'm going to start with the Ancestral Visions suspending. And so that's bad news. Our opponent actually has Spreading Seas. So that's going to stop the Seachrome Coast being able to produce white mana. So this puts us in a spot where we don't even have the option to hold up the Celestial Purge anymore. So if our opponent has the Blood Moon, it's going to be very bad news. So we're going to hope that that's not the case. We have a basic island on top that we scryed into. So we will have some blue if our opponent lands the Blood Moon, but luckily it looks like that's not going to happen. So we dodged a little bit of a bullet there, essentially. So I'm going to go for a Serum Visions here. And we're pretty much good on lands now. Found a Flooded Strand there, so I'm just going to pass the turn. Feeling in much better spot than the previous turn, just because we were able to... Just saying land go, I think we're favored because we have that Ancestral Visions that has been suspended already. So we have a core Firewalker we could try to force through, but I'm okay with waiting a little bit. Potentially our opponent could have had a card draw spell there. And I think we want to get a basic Plains with this Flooded Strand, help protect ourselves, and prepare for a counter war here. So we'll see what our opponent's got. Okay, it's going to be Cryptic. I think we have to fight for this. So I'm going to Cryptic it back, which is really our only way to counter this Cryptic. So I think we have to go for it. And as you can see, just a ton of gas now in hand. I'm going to pitch the core Firewalker because we actually have got into our maximum hand size after the Ancestral Vision resolved. And so now we're able to get to that classic control draw go sort of spot. We can actually start playing these Snapcaster Mages on our turn to flashback Serum Visions. Our opponent's probably got a mix of burn and counter magic in their hand. Maybe something like a Torrential Gearhulk, which we already saw. Oh, there's a Spreading Seas, so that's actually not a bad card to have here. Knowing what we're seeing on our opponent's side of the table, just that one Steam Vent, so we can make that Steam Vents into an island, which seems good. And I think I am going to go for a Snapcaster Mage here to try to get some pressure on our opponent now. We'll see if this causes our opponent to react with a counterspell, but it looks like the answer is going to be no on that front. So we can go for the mana leak here on this Torrential Gearhulk. Our opponent is tapped out. So that's going to mean that we know we're not going to run into a counterspell like a Spell Snare. And at this point, we want essentially all of our counter magic. So I'm going to put the Cryptic on top of our deck. And our opponent's just passing the turn here, so that's perfect. We now have a threat in play, which we can just use as a clock. And we're not forced to do anything. So I'm just going to play the Hallowed Fountain and pass the turn. Now, we know that our opponent has cards like Lightning Bolt, and Electrolyze. We're also drawing into a bunch of cards here with this Ancestral Vision. We'll see if our opponent wants to fight over this or not. So the fact is we're going to be in that maximum hand size spot again, where we're just going to have too many cards in our hand, potentially. It looks like our opponent's thinking if they want to fight over this, considering they know how many resources we have at our disposal. If we are allowed to draw these cards, we're going to go up to 10 cards in our hand, and we're going to have to try to dump some of these cards out or discard a number of them. So it looks like our opponent is going to react to this with the Cryptic command. And I think we want to fight back here. So the question is, between Snapcaster Mage and Cryptic, which do we want to go with? And I think we want to play our own copy of Cryptic command here. Looks like our opponent may continue to fight this battle, so here's a negate. But we have Spell Snare for that negate. Alright, so now we picked up a bunch of cards. Perfect. And I could have tapped slightly differently to avoid having this Ghost Quarter up, but I'm going to play out this Core Firewalker now. Okay, that's going to run into a Spell Snare, but we actually found ourselves with exactly 7 cards after that Counter War. That Electrolyze is pretty good. It's able to take out the only threat we had in hand and draw our opponent a card. But now, Elspeth is a powerful card. We only have 9 lands, so if our opponent were to have a Cryptic command for it, they could counter it. I think rather than playing the Elspeth this turn, I would rather wait. We can play the Vendilion Click at the end of our opponent's turn and make sure that the way is free to then land the Elspeth. So our opponent is down to 2 cards while we have a ton of gas. So hard to see how we lose this game. There's a Fatal Push. I think our opponent may have not realized that they didn't have Revolt, so that's a little bit awkward. But so just a Spell Snare in our opponent's hand. We are okay with that because it means that our Elspeth is going to resolve, which is the most important thing. And it probably just spells the game over. I wouldn't even be surprised if our opponent just packs it in after seeing this Elspeth.